Welcome back, guys. So you can see in the backdrop, this is 4th of July episode, so I've got a little margarita on the go. I've taken a few attempts to film this intro, so it's not as full as it should have been at the start. And in this episode, I'm looking into some more of the case files that's been released by the Department of War. There seems to be quite a lot of reports from the 40s in these data releases. In fact, I'd say pretty much all of them, all the accounts seem to be from the 40s or 50s. You know, I mean, obviously you've got like the NASA and Apollo stuff, but when you think about the actual recorded incidents, they're all pretty much from this period. And it makes me ask the question, why there are none from the 80s, 90s, or the noughties? You know, where are they? Perhaps that's a video for another day, though. Maybe a conclusion video when I've gone through them all thoroughly. So in this episode, the incidents are from the third tranche of documents, okay? So I've just picked a few out of one of the documents I'm reading through. Obviously, I can't do all of them, but these are what I found quite interesting. And this, I think this document's it's like 200 pages long, and I've only gone up to page 140 in here, and I've picked like several out of it. And even within this one document, I'm gonna have to do another video with more reports in. One very interesting report actually, which I think will probably be my next video. But first, like, subscribe, and comment. Also, apologies for the extended break there. I'm really busy at the moment. I've had to put YouTube on the back burner a little, but I'm hoping these things can settle down so I can do some more regular uploads again soon. Let's get into it. So from this document, this is on page 20, and I'll put the incident checklist up now. So they seem to have some sort of incident checklist. And also another thing in the report, sorry to sidetrack so early, but another thing in the report is it shows you the almost a checklist that they have when they're recording these incidents of UFOs and different marking criteria. And there are some very, very interesting consistencies with this that kind of give away the marking method and what the government deem as more important to UFOs. So things you would think of. I think one of them I found was apparently ones with green lights or red lights, much like the New Jersey drones. Actually, they seem to mark higher on potential UFO or seriousness that they would consider on this marking scheme in one of the documents. So maybe I'll delve into that as well another time. So this is 8th of March 1948 in Belmont, North Carolina, 11 a.m. Excellent weather with a few scattered clouds. It's stated that Mr. Morrison is a first grade engineer at Duke Power Plant, so he presumably knows some basic maths and physics principles. He describes a round metallic-like object moving very rapidly at an estimated 600 miles per hour. It could not be determined if it was a disc or a sphere, I suppose, because it's like that two-dimensional view that you have when you're on the ground looking up at an object. He did describe it as a bright or silver in colour and reflected the sun, maintaining a steady reflection and did not flicker. He observed the object for 10 seconds. It moved in a straight line at consistent speed and no apparent change in direction or altitude. It was impossible to determine the altitude, but was moving above the clouds. There was no sound of any kind and no exhaust trail observed. So again, it kind of fits that standard UFO stuff. The AI video, I mean, that one's the best. I'll level with the it's quite frustrating doing some of the AI stuff. That was supposed to be moving at 600 mile per hour. So, so case two. This is on page 31 of the document. So this is reported at 16:30 hours on an incident that took place at 09:55 hours on the 1st of April 1948. An intelligence officer of the 18th Fighter Group. So this was First Lieutenant Robert Mayers. So Mayers was leading a flight of 4 P-47 aircraft of the 67th Fighter Squadron, 18th Fighter Group, heading 180 degrees at 1,500 feet altitude. He spotted a UFO about 3 miles east of his position at an estimated 1,000 feet in altitude. The object was reported as being a flying wing type UFO, half moon crescent type craft, and apparently observed a barely perceptible dorsal fin on top of the craft, or it says just dorsal fin, but we're assuming that's likely some sort of stabilization fin of the craft. I've generated a rough image based on the description. So the Mayers altered course to try to intercept the craft, and it apparently done a 90-degree left turn, leveled out, and that's a very important detail, then rapidly accelerated and disappeared from sight in 5 seconds. No sound was heard, no exhaust or trails observed. The visibility was unlimited, so basically very good visibility. Scattered cumulus clouds had a base height of 3,000 feet, at tops 6,000 feet. So essentially far above them to be a factor. Now, the reason I state the part about leveling being important is because if this was some sort of anti-gravity technology, I don't feel it would have to level off. This level off component of the account actually implies it's a method of propulsion more similar to the standard methods that we know of, and perhaps that kind of fits in with like a slightly winged craft as well. But it's still very strange the way there's no method, no actual visible method of propulsion, no trail, no sounds or anything like this. So, from my understanding of the potential physics involved in terms of anti-gravity craft, and my own personal account and others' accounts of kind of, I suppose, the standard non-terrestrial examples of UFOs, this tilt is not fully compatible with that standard UFO. But again, as I say, it's strangely the lack of trail, the lack of sound does match this. So I wonder what's going on here. Comment below. Let me know. Let's have a brainstorm. What is this? I think also the AI video got to say on this one as well. Like this plane's just whizzing about doing all sorts of things there. It's AI. I think also we have to consider though that if we go on the assumption of that this, there could be different races out there. This would be, there would stand to reason to be different types of craft. But and perhaps these have evolved differently, so the timescales on each, some would be more advanced than others, that kind of thing. But then I suppose the lines can get a bit blurred if we consider how far a stretch is this from the type of craft that was around prior to this, as like the end of the World War II and that kind of era, and even concept crafts and stuff like that at that time. How far is it from the Junkers EF-130? And I'll put a picture up, for example, or the Horton HO-18. That was a concept craft by the Germans in World War II. So if we assume that they may have had an incomplete design of this and the acquisition of scientists and information by governments at the end of the war, all the scientists working for the Allies, particularly America, and that secret nature needed for these development that was in place because of World War II. And also, don't forget, I mean, even the Americans at the time didn't fully trust Europe at the start of the war and eventually even after it. There are American policies in place that state this and are well known, but that's another issue. So this secrecy and advancement in technology, it kind of, with all these scientists that are gathered to work on these concept crafts, it does look very similar to it. It really does. Furthermore, I think one of the issues that the Germans or Nazis had in World War II was the fact that they were quite segregating the scientific development by one country acquiring all these scientists and the research and all the development they had and then focusing solely on this. It's almost like putting all the heads together in pointing in one direction as opposed to several things in different directions. So, further to this account, another pilot also gave a statement which, not surprisingly, matched almost exactly that of Meyer's. So, the image we imagine from Meyer's description is follows, but the other pilot stated it as having a turtle back, so it could be something more like this. So the next case, case three, and this is quite interesting. These next two cases, they're linked in the same incident as two different observers, and there are actually other reports and statements of this in the case file, but they're incredibly brief. Okay, so the first observer, well, all of it, both these observers, are trained balloon observers at a geophysics lab station. So again, this is 1948. It's not all farmers and drunk people. In fact, all of these reports seem to be from pilots, military officers, and professionals. So we can assume here, given he's a balloon observer at a geophysics station, he's fairly certain, what geophysics balloons look like. So I'll give the summary and then the statement. So it consisted of one object for about 30 seconds of vision, very high altitude, described as tremendous at tremendous speed, flighting to the west. Motion described as made 3 vertical loops, upon completion of which it disappeared in a large arc to the west. The size is described visually as if the moon is the size of an orange, the object was the size of a dime. So a quick back of an envelope calculation on this. If the altitudes are about 15k, it would be about 31 foot. If it was 20k, it would be about 42 feet. and 30k, these are in altitude, in feet, it would be about 63 feet in size. This is by no means accurate, as we don't really know the altitude to calculate the angular size relative to the moon. But if we knew the altitude, we probably could calculate this based on historic astronomical data for the region and the size discrepancy between the moon and the object as described. So anyway, moving on. The shape was described as bore some resemblance to, but definitely not a balloon, which, given the observer, we can take as incredibly likely to be true. He's not going to mistake something for a balloon. He's a balloon observer. So the situation is this. Mr. Johnson said the object was absolutely silent in the desert. No audible noise was heard from it all or from the 400 MC receiver that it was listening to, so no interference on this either. He stated the wind at high altitude was calm, being 10 to 15 miles per hour from the west at 65,000 feet. Remember, this object went to the west, so it was against the wind, albeit a calm wind. It goes on to say, with the other witnesses, they all agree that the object was very high, moved faster than any known aircraft, possessed a rounded, indistinct form, and disappeared suddenly rather than fading away, and under observation for about 30 seconds or less. Also, all of them agree, judging by the violent maneuvers which were performed at high rate of speed, it was not manned. Again, it goes back to that G-force of sharp maneuvers, different turns, like that kind of thing. The amount of G's that anyone would be under in that thing, it would not be survivable. So there's not much really in the statement. There's not a massive body sort of text in it as such. But I suppose you've got that kind of statement overcard and that kind of thing, and some of the statements are jumbled up. And the other ones that I previously mentioned in the same incident were actually way earlier on in the document, and it does reference them. But again, there's not a massive amount of information in there that we can't get from these, and these are very reputable as well, like the observer sources. But so the motion description is basically what happened in these. But keeping with this incident, another observer reported the following. Again, a trained balloon observer at the geophysics lab, Mr. Chance, who viewed it for 30 seconds. This goes slightly further. Mr. Chance describes the object as a gold hue. As I can say, a glue hold. Which had the which had the appearance of a major's insignia, that is, irregularly rounded and slightly concave on the top. So the motion brief is, one went straight up and one disappeared. He seems to have seen two, this guy. I think he was the only one out of the group that saw two. Everyone else just saw one. So the motion brief is this. One went straight up and one disappeared to the west. The first one veered to the right, started down, and was lost to view. I don't know. I'm not sure what it means by that started down, but that's as the statement's read. I'm assuming the first one, obviously, because he said it veered right, and it mentions in the document. And he said previously, like the guy before, Mr. Johnson, he didn't see the one that veered to the left, and that's actually it's actually noted on the documents. And it seems to be that the one that veered to the left and then dipped, obviously, is the one that he saw. So, given the other one he states disappeared to the west, assuming this is the one that went straight up. So presumably, if it's gone straight up, it's gone into the atmosphere. Again, it says 947, 948. Strange. So he said the second one made an arc into the west at terrific speed and disappeared suddenly. Remember, guys, these are literally balloon observers. Also, they were stationed at Holloman Air Force Base, so would see presumably both balloons and planes all the time. So we have to remember here, these performed a maneuver and disappeared from view. In a desert on a clear day, I checked the local area and it was a clear day for this area. I think it was zero precipitation, 66 Fahrenheit or about 18 Celsius. So it disappeared in less than 30 seconds at high altitude. That matters. The higher the altitude the object is, the longer it should take to disappear from view, barring certain other factors. But as a rule of thumb, that's the case. So 30 seconds, the distance must have travelled to, if we take the general line of sight at different altitudes and degrees, the minimum speed becomes about 300 miles per hour. But this is at 15k altitude and low degrees. So that's assuming it's in the distance, it's just disappeared. If it was overhead, it would be much faster. These said it was at high altitude, and obviously in the area they're in, they probably see aircraft quite frequently as they're on an Air Force base in the desert. So and also even the certain geophysics balloons. So the max passenger plane altitude back then was about 20,000 feet. So if we take the 20k and 30k heights, this gives us a speed of between 500 miles per hour and 25,000 miles per hour. As I say, it depends on the degree observed overhead to the horizon. So obviously, if they're observing this at something like, I don't know, like a 60 degree, that's going to be the speed to go from the 60 degree to the horizon is going to be much quicker in that time frame than if it was something like about 30 degrees. So that's something to consider. So here's where I play devil's advocate. So Holloman Air Force Base basically housed the Republic Ford JB2 Loon, which only flew at about 4,000 feet, and it became a test base for early remote aircraft. So it goes to that unmanned aircraft aspect that they've mentioned before. So in September 1947, that military base actually had the Northrop OQ-19 radio-controlled aircraft. It was tested there. So, we have to ask ourselves, is this coincidence? This remote control that they've claimed it has to be unmanned. This was an aircraft base which tested new technology for unmanned aircraft. This sighting, extreme as it is and as reliable as the sources are, does it illustrate just how far advanced these government facilities were at this period in time? I have to draw another connection here as well. Roswell is only 126 miles away from Holloman Air Force Base, and it just makes you think a little bit. This is secret tech, obviously that kind of time frame as well. It was still, there's friction with the Russians at this point. It was the kind of start of the Cold War. It's strange looking into this phenomenon as a whole. As I flip, we come across a case, it looks fantastic. Then a little bit below the surface, it opens up to some questions, and some questions in other areas that we haven't thought about. It gets a little disheartening at some point if you're kind of, when you're kind of hoping that there's something else there. But the aim here is not to think with the hearts, it's to think with our minds. And that's what truth is. And unfortunately, it does open up the possibility there, that there could be some advanced government tech at this time in this area. And perhaps this is the reason for this stuff. If we can take into consideration the correlation between coincidences in favor of non-human intelligence and UFOs, which we do in many cases, we look at, well, here's the correlation is far beyond that would be accepted normally, and that's in favor of like non-human intelligence side of the argument, then we have to apply the same logic against it as well. The next case I'm looking into, though, which will be the next video, is very interesting as it opens up more questions in either scenario, whether it's non-human or human. It's quite interesting, and it's got me pondering a few questions, but I'll save that for next time. Like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you think. Well, is this connection pure coincidence, or do you think there's something underlying this? There are a lot of, if you were to pin this on a board, there's a lot of pinpoints that are all attached by strings here, connecting to each other. Thank you. Happy 4th of July. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.